Hello, and thank you for joining our Tech In for the 21st Century webinar series brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and Glazov Gang. I'm your host, Annie Cyrus. Before I introduce our very special guest, if you have any questions, please put them on a Q&A box you see on your screen for our Q&A at the end. And now for our very special guest. I know him as the most brilliant mind of our time. He is Daniel Greenfield, the editor and the writer of the blog The Point, and also a Shellman Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center. Daniel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Annie, for doing a wonderful job of setting everything up as usual. Annie is really essential. Without her, nothing would work. Are you essential? Or are you non-essential? Do you look in the mirror and think, I'm non-essential? And how does it make you feel that government officials have gone down the list of professions and careers and businesses and decided this person is non-essential? Now, in America, we're not supposed to have a caste system. We don't have lords, we don't have serfs. We're all supposed to be equal. And yet, we now have a caste system. It's the caste system that defines economic, social life today. It defines in some ways whether, at least in some places, whether you can even leave the house. And the caste system is essential versus non-essential. Essential people are, of course, allowed to go places and do things and earn a living. And non-essential people, well, they're not supposed to even leave the house most of the time. You're non-essential. Stay at home. It's safer at home. We're all in this together. You know, Governor Cuomo, the guy who's currently angling for the White House in a stealth campaign that assumes that by Election Day, Joe Biden will be unable to make his way from the hallway to the bathroom or even find where his pants are, is just doing these constant press conferences. And the recent one, people asked him about the protests, people who are protesting the lockdown. And Cuomo said, well, you know, these non-essential people, they should get essential jobs, like, you know, and he didn't say this, but I would assume, what are essential jobs that are allowed today? Delivering packages for Amazon? Delivering pizza? What does an essential job even consist of at this point? Well, it consists of whatever the people who decide what essential jobs are say that it should be. And what does that mean? Well, it means that they're the ones in charge of the economic, political, social caste system. That's what it really amounts to. They get to decide who gets to work, who doesn't get to work. They get to decide, you belong here, you don't belong here. You'd better not even leave the house. And you know, you're out of work, you're a dental hygienist who's been furloughed, you're a small business owner who's been forced to close up shop. Go deliver packages for Amazon because Governor Cuomo decided that that's what really matters. Now, fun fact, why is the media still up and about and operating? Well, because Governor Cuomo decided that, say, organizations like CNN, which coincidentally employs his brother, are essential. Now, the media is essential. Does the media seem that essential to you? When you look at CNN or MSNBC or, you know, any really news program or newspaper, you're going, this is essential. This is like food. It's like water. It's like power. It's what keeps me alive. What would I ever do without the media? Well, you know, there is a particular group of people that do think that way. And that group of people are known as politicians. Now, in a mild conflict of interest, the politicians, the people who entirely depend on the media for what is life-sustaining for them, coverage, propaganda, power, are saying that the media is essential. Now, of course, the media has put on this facade. We're working from home. You've got Chris, and of course, it's a genuine Chris Cuomo's emergence from quarantine after he'd already been caught breaking quarantine. And now, right now, you've got 3 CNN anchors who have tested positive for coronavirus. So CNN seems to be some sort of coronavirus hub. But you know what? Despite all those videos of the anchors, they're just like regular people. Look, they've got their furniture behind them. They've got their pictures and they've got their books and all the stuff is right next to them. Despite that, Guess what? A news network does not actually run on people working from home. No major media organization is just run entirely by people working from home. You know who are the people who can work from home in a major media organization? The people at the very top, like, say, Chris Cuomo and all the major anchors, including three of them who have come down with coronavirus. How many other staffers at CNN have come down with coronavirus? We just don't know because, well, they don't really want to tell us. But statistically speaking, CNN has 4,000 employees. Of those, Jeff Zucker, the boss, has recently said in an email, 10% are still working from in the office, which means 400 people. Now, you and I are told, don't leave the house. You're just spreading coronavirus. You're killing people. If you go surf, we're going to arrest you. If you go play catch in the park, we're going to arrest you because you're spreading virus. Stay safer at home. Stay safer at home. That doesn't apply to CNN. CNN has got 400 employees working at the office. And mind you, we're talking about the media itself, which means we're talking about a whole lot more than 400 people. The media has gotten quite a lot of dispensations in this regard. Now, again, you or I want a coronavirus test. Good luck. Chris Cuomo, Brooke Baldwin, Rich Quest, other CNN personnel have had no problem getting tested. NBC News, CBS News, both of them had employees who were in the studios who tested positive for coronavirus. The facility was cleaned down. People were working there the next day. Try doing that if you're a small business. So many small businesses, so many companies have been shut down without a single defined case of coronavirus. So the media has a lot of special privileges. And its biggest privilege is the media is deemed to be essential by the politicians who deem it to be essential. Now, this goes back right to our central question. Really, are politicians essential? Are the politicians doing a great essential job of handling this crisis? Or is it really the people, the ordinary people, whether it's truckers, whether it's supermarket workers, whether it's doctors and nurses, whether it's the people who actually keep this internet running, whether it's the people who keep the power on? Those people are essential. Politicians, I hate to break this to them, are not essential. They're about as essential as the media is. They're very good for appearing on camera and then lecturing other people on how they should live and what they should do and all that other fun stuff. Because, well, that's what they're good for. Congress is back in session. Of course, it's creating committees and spending money. Congress does two things. It creates committees and spends money. Governor Andrew Cuomo is doing these constant press conferences. And these press conferences, which are covered by the media, of course, are publicity stunts. So early on, first diagnosed case in New York City, not the actual first case because we don't know how far back that goes, but first diagnosed case was a woman who came in from Iran on Qatar Airways, and Governor Cuomo was there and he was saying, we're going to locate the other passengers on her flight and we're going to track them down. And of course they did nothing of the sort because it was a publicity stunt. Governor Cuomo claimed that he had prison inmates producing hand sanitizer. You know what? They were not. They were just repackaging hand sanitizer that the state had bought. Because Cuomo's whole thing is an empty, hollow facade. It's all a whole bunch of lies. That is what politicians do. They put on a show. They don't actually solve problems. A pandemic is not a problem that's going to be solved by politicians. It's a problem that is going to be solved by ordinary people, whether it's the people who are actually fighting the disease or it's the people who are actually keeping society running. That's the fundamental issue right here. Now, going back to the Founding Fathers, the vision that they laid out in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution is not that politicians, political leaders, elected officials are essential. No, it's that government is the least essential part. Government's purpose is protecting our rights from itself. That is what government does. It also administers things. But it is the least essential part of society. The part of society that is the most essential is us. We do not work for the government. We do not serve the government. The government serves us. Politicians are our employees, and we often tend to forget that. Now, the reason we often tend to forget that is because we're panicked into it, because we're stampeded by fear, because we're made to feel helpless. Does that sound familiar? Most people at this point feel helpless, and of course they accept this kind of vast economic rationing where the politicians decide, well, you are essential, you are non-essential. You can go to work, you can't go to work. You will be arrested if you leave the house. You will, of course, not be arrested if you leave the house. Essential versus non-essential. Now, to begin the revolution is to, first of all, state firmly that politicians are not essential. Politicians had one job in this regard for stopping the pandemic. They had one major job, and that was a travel ban. President Trump tried to implement one. He was undermined by figures in the administrative state. It was undermined by appointees and really lifers in the State Department and throughout that. The bottom line is we failed to stop this thing at the border. We should have had a comprehensive travel ban. President Trump tried to implement it. At that point, the government has very limited things it can do. All the stuff about PPEs and ventilators was really so much hot air. The bottom line is we're still getting much of our protective equipment from China. The ventilator crisis never actually arrived. All this was theater. It was theater. Because the real people who are actually solving the problem were not the people on camera. People who actually do things are not on camera. And the crisis, and when there is a crisis, you know what the people who are urgently managing the crisis? They're not on camera. If they're on any kind of camera, it's on Steadicam or on shaky, grainy cell phone footage. The bottom line is this crisis is not going to be fixed by politicians. Politicians have a role to play in dealing with the economic fallout of it. But as far as the actual pandemic goes, as far as the endless press conferences go, as far as Governor Cuomo sitting there and pretending that he's managing the crisis, all of that is a bunch of lies. In fact, politicians can do things. They can make things worse. Again, let's get back to Governor Andrew Cuomo. Current numbers say that about 1 out of 4 nationwide, possibly even more, or 1 out of 5, possibly even more in New York, of the deaths due to the coronavirus, the Chinese virus, the Wuhan virus, were occurred in nursing homes. Now, Governor Cuomo over in New York and Governor Newsom over in California, their health departments had a great idea. Let's take patients who are infected with the coronavirus and force nursing homes to accept them. And they did that. Now, Chris Cuomo, everybody at CNN was able to get tested very, very quickly. Much power to them. You know, if you're a celebrity or if you're a media celebrity, you can get tested pretty quickly. If you're an ordinary person, not so much. So people in nursing homes were not actually being tested. And we've got thousands of deaths, and we've had people with coronavirus being sent back into nursing homes. Now, Governor Cuomo, instead of doing his press conferences, could have prevented that. He could have tracked down the people on that original flight. But Governor Cuomo has not been doing that. He's been doing press conferences. And he's essential, and the media is essential because they're the people in charge, because they're the propagandists, and they're the politicians. Now, in a crisis, the last thing you need are more politicians and propagandists. They're not essential. And yet they've seized power. They've engaged in a coup d'etat against the American people by trying to define who is essential, who is non-essential. They have not accorded these definitions, their rules, with the mere Bill of Rights. You know, Governor Murphy coming out and saying, well, no, of course he hadn't considered the Bill of Rights. What does the Bill of Rights have to do with him? That's generally been the attitude across the board. Attorney General Barr said he'd look into it. Hopefully, he actually takes some kind of meaningful action, because what we have are wholesale violations of civil rights on a previously unprecedented scale. Now, the way we take power is to, first of all, recognize the simple fact that politicians work for us. We are essential. They are not. The Bill of Rights is essential. Safer with the Constitution. The Bill of Rights does not just apply when government says it's okay for it to apply. That's how it works in the European Union. You know, when you look at the European Union documents, they have a lot of human rights documents. They have human rights commission. They have rights commissions. They have so many human rights commissions that if you got them all into a football stadium, they'd fill up all the stands. And I mean, they wouldn't actually be able to play football because they're completely useless. But you'd have so many of them. They're all concerned with human rights. But when you look at the bottom line and the fine print of all those documents, you have freedom of speech. Of course you have freedom of speech. Unless the government decides you shouldn't have freedom of speech. If you have freedom of religion, of course you have freedom of religion. Unless the government decides you shouldn't have freedom of religion or you're Muslim. It goes down all the way down. They give you so many rights, and all those rights have a footnote. They have a little asterisk, and it's unless the government decides you shouldn't have those rights. So the Bill of Rights is fundamentally different. There's no asterisk to the Bill of Rights. There's no, unless the government thinks it's a good idea. The Bill of Rights fundamentally applies when the government thinks it's not a good idea. Because if the government thinks that the Bill of Rights is a good idea, you don't even need it. If the government is okay with your speech, then what do you need freedom of speech for? It doesn't play any meaningful role. I mean, you don't need freedom of speech or freedom of the press for CNN. No, what you need it for is unpopular speech. What you need it for is times when the government says, well, I'm okay with freedom of speech except for this guy. And this guy might be a jerk. He might be a horrible person. Freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion applies to people you think are horrible jerks. It applies to things that may not seem like a good idea. The point of the Bill of Rights is not that it should only be implemented when it's a good idea. The point of the Bill of Rights, the point of the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, is that it's applies to people you shouldn't think have those rights. It applies to people, speech, whatever, that the government does not approve of, that even most of society maybe doesn't approve of. That's the whole point. The Bill of Rights is essential because it is universal. It's not, okay, we have a crisis now, we're suspending the Bill of Rights. Okay, guys, wait until the crisis ends. You can have freedom of assembly again. You can go out and protest. But now there's no freedom of assembly. It's not, you have freedom of religion unless there's a crisis. That's not how it works. Now, how should it work? How should you respond to a pandemic or any crisis? I mean, you have to compel people to do the right thing, and you have politicians, and they're going to compel people to do the right thing. Isn't that how it works? I mean, it worked so great in the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, and North Korea. It's fantastic. I mean, you can't expect people to do the right thing on their own. That's crazy. I mean, what are we, America or something? Yeah. Here's the thing. America is based on voluntary cooperation. You know what? The founding fathers trusted us to generally make the right decisions. Here's a crazy, insane idea. What if the government, like say the Swedish government, actually trusted Americans to make the right decisions? Yes, there will be some people who will break the rules. You know what? Those people are breaking the rules anyway. The people most likely to break the rules are the people you can't enforce anything on anyway. Thus, for example, in New York, there was a gangland shooting, and then we had a vigil with 100 people there, and the mayor said, well, I mean, we couldn't really enforce anything there because, I mean, it wouldn't work. And there are certainly huge homeless encampments right here in LA. There are all sorts of people who are breaking the rules, and the rules are never going to be enforced on them. That's just the reality of it. But Americanism is really built on the idea that most people will actually do the right thing without being compelled to do it. And that's true. If you ask people, stay home for the safety of your relatives, I'm not going to get into the merits of the whole staying home thing at the moment, but I'm just saying, protect your loved ones, protect your family members. I mean, I am for the most part staying home because I do have a relative who's elderly and has breathing problems. So I certainly don't want anything to happen to them. I may be a bit skeptical about some of this stuff, but you know what? For the most part, people will engage in ways that will actually protect their loved ones, protect other people, protect their neighbors. They will do that because most people are people of goodwill. Now, they will make calculated risks. They will make calculated decisions about what's right for them, what's right for their relatives, and they have the right to do that. Because really it's a country that is run by the American people. And ultimately people are going to make those decisions, and we have to trust people to make those decisions. Because for the most part, you know, I mean, we trust people to elect our leaders, yet our leaders don't trust people to actually leave the house. There's a basic problem here. If the American people can't be trusted to decide when they can leave the house, how can they be trusted to elect leaders? You know, that was what 2016 was about. We can't actually trust the American people to engage in elections. So, you know what? Before long, we're going to have to fix those elections so that nobody inappropriate ever runs there. And there are plenty of people in the media who have been saying that since 2016. That's the next step of this problem. And that's what happens when you actually have a caste system. It's what happens when you have power concentrated on top. And really the entire classification, essential versus non-essential. Politicians are essential. Their media lackeys are essential. You are non-essential. You will be told if you are essential or non-essential by the people who are in charge. Fundamentally redistributes power. It shifts power up to the politicians, away from the people. It fundamentally changes the relationship between the people and the government. And that's a huge problem. This is exactly why we had an American Revolution in the first place. We don't have kings. For that matter, we don't have a priestly class of experts who are running the country. It's not going to be experts who decide when to open the country. That's not how it works. We have elected officials because not because those elected officials are the best or the brightest or the smartest, because we chose them. Even if we chose wrongly, we chose them. Those people are accountable to us. They are our employees. That's why elections matter. Elections define the relationship between people and the government. They say that the politicians work for us. We do not work for them. The government serves us. We do not serve the government. Now, these are all cliches. I can repeat them over and over again without actually investing meaning in them until we actually invest the meaning in them ourselves. And in a crisis, it is easy to forget that. It is easy to listen to authority. It is easy to listen to the people who are giving the orders. Essential, non-essential. You are essential. You are non-essential. Well, at least somebody's in charge and telling us what to do. No. We are in charge, or at least we are in charge for as long as we wish to be in charge. When we cease to which to be in charge. When we want somebody else to run things for us, as quite a few people do, certainly in New York, people are quite happy to have Andrew Cuomo and his nipple rings run things because he's doing press conferences. He must be doing something. What he's doing? Well, nobody really asks. What has the government done to solve this crisis? Well, the CDC failed badly. State governors in New York and California did a great job. I mean, they did a great job of introducing coronavirus to nursing homes, killing quite a few of the people who have actually died in this pandemic. And they do press conferences, and they're essential, and the media is essential, and power is essential, because that's what it comes down to. What does essential really mean? A few states, Pennsylvania and Michigan, have called it life-sustaining, which of course is ridiculous, because then you have to argue that abortion clinics are life-sustaining, which that woman in Michigan decided to do. And you have to decide that the media is life-sustaining, which, no, not remotely. But essential has been the mark of the caste system. If you're non-essential, it's the mark of Cain. And until we shift that, things are not going to change. So the first step is to avoid panic, to avoid fear, because when people panic, when they're afraid, well, they turn over everything to whoever's giving them orders. Well, he's giving orders, she's giving orders. Well, it seems like they might know what they're doing. Let's leave them in charge. They've got models. I mean, the models have repeatedly failed, but let's listen to the models. I mean, they're experts. They have titles. They've got PhDs. They know more than we do. That's not the American response to a crisis. The American response to a crisis is for everyone to pull together. It is for us to use common sense, to be rational, to examine the evidence and pass our own judgment. Think of it as ask the audience. The American response to a crisis is ask the audience. It is not put that guy in charge because he sounds like he knows what he's doing. Second thing, well, I mean, this shouldn't be said really, but behave decently. Now, that can mean a variety of things. It means don't put other people at risk. It also means don't inform on your neighbors. The rules have not fundamentally changed. The rules of moral conduct and behavior are still the same as they ever were. Behave decently. If your neighbor is trying to earn a living, don't inform on them. Follow common sense rules for yourself. And don't try to impose them on others. This is not Nazi Germany. It's not the Soviet Union. There's no Stasi here. Don't be Stasi. Third of all is to make it very clear that whatever you're doing, you do not accept the authority of any government agency, any level of government to deprive you of any part of your Bill of Rights. You may be choosing to stay home, but it's not because you have to stay home. You are choosing to stay home because you are trying to keep other people safe. You're trying to do the right thing. It is not because you accept that you can be compelled to do so. That's a fundamental difference, and it's one that we really ought to consider and keep in mind. As we grapple with these questions, and these are challenging questions, we have to begin by going back to the basics. This is fundamentally a question of the relationship between people and the government, which means, yes, we have to go back to first principles, but principles are often not enough in the face of challenges. There is the Constitution. It's a very nice document. You can go to Washington, D.C. and look at it under the glass. But a document is a piece of paper. It's how we do things that really counts. It's how we live by it that counts. Now, you notice this conversation is free of pushing particular policies, pushing particular drugs, telling you what to do. Should you leave the house? Should you not leave the house? Is boating okay? Is motorized boating okay? In Maryland, motorized boating is not okay, but paddle boats are okay. You've got all these welter of competing, confusing rules. That's not the point of this. The point of this is to remember and reevaluate our relationship, because this is just the beginning. The pandemic itself is potentially an endless crisis with a recurrence in the winter, and who knows for how long. And beyond that, we don't know the outcome of the next election. We don't know the composition of the Senate, and we certainly don't know who's going to be sitting in the White House, though hopefully it's not a very confused, senile man in a wig who can hardly complete a sentence. But again, you don't know, and I'm not in the business of offering firm predictions. There are people who do that. What I would like to tell you is that the bigger issues are going to endure either way. Let's say this is all over in a month or two, which I certainly hope will be the case. Well, the fundamental issues will continue because the politicians and the media have seen how seductive, how incredibly powerful a crisis can make them. They're not just going to give that up. They're absolutely not. Which means there will be more crises. And yes, obviously, there will be the usual the earth is burning, global warming stuff. They're not going to stop there. But there will be potentially other crises. Where there was one pandemic, there can be another pandemic. The Constitution, the Bill of Rights, was written not just for that time and date. That's what leftists believe. We believe it was written for the national existence of this country, which means it does not go away, which means it does not go away when we are frightened. It means that it does not go away when there's a Chinese virus. It means that it does not go away just because some politicians have told us that it does. And we've seen authorities at a drive-in church service, at a playground, stating that there's basically no freedom at all. Right of assembly, what is that? Freedom of assembly? Come on. No, all the stuff applies. Now, and this should go without saying, we are expected to use our freedoms responsibly. That's the whole point. A country that is fundamentally free is one where people behave responsibly, where they can actually be trusted to use their rights in a responsible way. Not everybody can be, but the American solution to that is not to have a powerful, overreaching government. The solution is to put our faith in our fellow man and believe that most people do make the right decisions. And you know what? Most Americans do make the right decisions. Maybe not always at the ballot box, but they do make the right decisions in their personal lives when it comes to how they treat their neighbors. Americans are still the most generous, really the nicest, and, because the left cares about this above all else, by the way, the least racist people in the world. If you leave your wallet in the store, you're far more likely to get it back in America than a whole lot of other places you will go to. Americans are overall more honest, more decent, more charitable than anybody else in the world. And that's because we're freer. Free people can make moral decisions. Slaves can't make moral decisions. Slaves can just obey. The whole premise of the caste system, the essential and non-essential, is that we must obey. Obey. The guy who came up with the Obama Hope thing, Shepard Fairey. Before that, I used to see all the stuff in Manhattan. It would be a stylized version of Andrew the Giant and the huge letters saying, obey. And really, the two are one and the same. And that's all we get from the left. Obey, obey, obey. We know what's good for you. That's not how our system works. Our system works on people deciding what is good for them. Otherwise, it doesn't matter. And as I mentioned, this particular crisis will pass on. There will be other crises. And the Bill of Rights must endure. And that is the fundamental thing to remember. The Bill of Rights must endure. The Constitution must endure. America must endure. The relationship that we've laid out between the government and the people must endure. Government is not essential. That is what we fought a revolution over. Kings, rulers are not essential. The freedom of the American people, that is essential. And when you look at this crisis, a crisis is not a reason to suspend that freedom. When you actually look at the people who are solving the problem, they're not politicians. They are people, ordinary people, who are going about their day and doing their job. Meanwhile, Congress enacts committees, spends money. Governor Cuomo and assorted other politicians angle for the 2020 race, perhaps, or at least the 2024 race, by putting themselves forward and passing ever more draconian regulations in order to have a shot at it. Because to be a candidate, a nominee for the Democrat Party, you need to have the most draconian regulations possible. Thus, Governor Whitmore said, okay, I'm going to leap ahead in the race to be the next vice president. And, when Biden actually is forced to step down, the next president, by banning people from planting seeds and banning them from going to any other houses. I mean, that's the Democrat way. It's not the American way. As Americans, we believe in freedom. We believe that most people will make the right choices. And we believe that people should have the right to choose. Because for the most part, when you actually give people the right to choose, not only will they make right choices, but the overall impact will be far better than the countries where there was compulsion. Unfortunately, too many state governors have adopted the Chinese system. There are drones now in the sky, and there are mandates, and there are police everywhere. That's not the American way. Let's be Americans. And as Americans, let's remember, government is not essential. The people are.
That was wonderful. As scary as it was, but then the way you close it, of course, it's knowing that this is not the end. And I'm glad you said it. I think many people are trying to say it that we the people, we can put an end to this, but then not enough we the people are doing anything about it. So thank you, Daniel. Hopefully your word is going to affect people to realize we can stop this whole corruption. Again, I'm not saying coronavirus doesn't exist, but I'm not going to take too much of your time. The first question I have here says, how can a small business ever take long-term risk again? Government might declare them non-essential again next year and put them back out of business. How do they take a risk again?
It's a very good question. A lot of small business owners, really the backbone of the country, are in a very scary situation.
So I guess it goes
They've
back to,
actually been hung out to dry.
is it
Sorry?
safe to say we can blame the government, or we shouldn't say that?
Well, certainly the government plays a good role, is responsible for actually going out and making these decisions. Now, the question is, how do we actually reestablish confidence? Now, the problem has been that business owners really don't know what to expect. We have different set of rules in different states. We have mixed messages coming from the federal government. So first of all, even when there is a crisis, there needs to be a consistent set of policies, and then business owners need to know what to expect. I mean, we've seen changes of rules all the time, particularly in some of the blue states, which are obviously riskier than some of the red states. Now, obviously, I live in the blue state, you live in the blue state. A lot of us here on this chat are probably very much living in blue states. But at the same time, the basic reality is we need to push for consistent standards, and they need to be lawful standards. They need to be able to be challenged in court. Right now, we have basically various officials with almost no oversight making the decisions based on whatever is going into their head at any given time. That is not acceptable. So especially because this is now turning into some sort of indefinite emergency with warnings that this is going to return once again in the winter, which means we've really got an indefinite crisis, and business owners need to push for standards. They need to push for legal oversight of all these decisions that are being made by politicians, and need to work with associations. There are conservative associations that are going to stand up and protect businesses and sue when there is a conflict.
I've noticed a lot of businesses that are based on internet are also suffering because a lot of people are home, as you said, on YouTube, Netflix, Hulu, somewhere watching. So the internet issue has actually become a serious issue. And I say that because my own business is completely based on internet. And it takes me days to do things that I used to do for an hour.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a lot of the infrastructure is very much overloaded. That is going to only get worse as time goes on. We've already seen in Europe, they've actually been reducing bandwidth for certain applications, including Netflix and YouTube. It's only, the internet infrastructure is only going to get under more strain here. And you know, the economy is entirely intertwined. The internet, Silicon Valley is not isolated from the rest of the economy. Amazon is doing really well. Production companies are going to run into trouble. And just on a practical level, when people aren't paying rent, that moves upward, and it damages people's investments. And I mean, even Netflix's actual investments are falling at this point. So it's all intertwined. And when you have certain sectors of the economy being taken out, it is going to spread outward.
Is it in part a matter of trust? The left trusts the government, the right doesn't.
So that is a good point. The left certainly believes that government is the solution. To the left, really, government is God. Freedom of religion is non-essential to them because religion to them is the worship of government. It's the idea that government can redeem us, government can save us. That's why they're always talking about making this the World War II. It's climate change. It's the pandemic. It's this opportunity for government to show just how effective their experts and their activists can be in transforming our lives. So for the right is not especially interested in government. I mean, there obviously are fascist elements, particularly in Europe, but most Americans want limited government. Most conservative Americans want to be left alone, and the current situation is the opposite of being left alone.
Good point. Well, it's you. You always have great points. Next question here on the Q&A box says, will more of us just start ignoring government rules? And is that becoming a major risk to society?
Well, I don't know if it's a risk. I think ignoring rules is actually a good thing because you know what? You have to push back. Otherwise, I mean, we have separation of powers within the branches of government, but we also have a tension between government power and individuals. I mentioned already that government was meant to be a kind of civil war. All of society is meant to be that way. Government is not just meant to have established powers, there's meant to be a push and pull relationship. So people push back against the government. There's the famous Thomas Jefferson quote about a revolution every 50 years, I believe. Somebody will correct me in chat, no doubt. We're meant to constantly be challenging the government for power, and this actually forces limits on the government because simply having a document, I mean, the Constitution is a beautiful document. You can go to Washington, D.C., you can see copies of it under glass, but a document itself is just a piece of paper. You actually have to live it. You actually have to enforce it. And one way you do that is by constantly showing independence, showing freedom. And I'm not telling people to do certain risky things necessarily, but overall, a certain amount of civil disobedience is very healthy for a society. That's what great thinkers on both the right and the left have agreed upon. And then that's not just the case when things are perfectly fine, because then civil disobedience is less relevant. You need to test government power. You always need to do that.
This one is about, okay, so the question says, inflation or deflation or stagflation are now sure to become problems around the world. Is there a way out of this mess?
So that is a very heavy economic question. I think that one's a little bit outside my pay grade. Welcome anybody in chat. There are probably people who are actually trained economists. I believe there's at least one gentleman who's a trained economist in chat who might be able to tackle that one. President Trump's policies initially were quite crucial in stabilizing the economy. At this point, we are burning through a lot of money, and obviously a lot of politicians see a lot of bailouts, a lot of government spending as an easy fix. It's not an easy fix. It's not even a Band-Aid. And we're really seeing just how broken the solutions that Congress put into place were. We're seeing that with small business. We're seeing that with the entire idea of just writing checks to anybody, regardless of their employment status, based on their 2018 tax returns. None of that is working, and I have every confidence that Congress will continue to do stupid things that won't work and that will worsen our economic situation.
On the whole, is the global left pushing for the unified global techno-totalitarian system, or is this an overblown perspective?
Well, you know, one of the fun things we're seeing, and by fun, I'm being very euphemistic about it, we've got all sorts of drone solutions. So in New Jersey, you've got these drones that are flying over people's backyards and yelling at them, "You're not distant enough in your backyard." And you've got drones, I believe, that they're testing, I think, in Seattle, which will measure exactly how far apart people are. And if they're less than 6 feet apart, then we're going to shout at them. And you've got other drones that are supposed to be able to measure people's temperature from a distance. So you've got this very, very creepy technocracy, and Silicon Valley is very much on top of that. Apple and Google are working to turn everybody's phone into spyware, and YouTube and Facebook are censoring any political dissent. So we have a lot of this technology that is able to manage our society, at least seemingly from the top down. And of course, this is what the left very much wants. The left believes that with the right tools, it can actually make all the failures in the Soviet Union and communist China work. Of course it can't, but it's going to wreck a lot of people's lives trying.
Is there anything else you'd like to add considering the questions that were coming your way?
Well, there are a lot of great questions. I'm kind of scrolling up here. Sam Sorbo is fantastic. I was on their show recently, makes a very good point that we've been trained in school to follow directions and believe without question anyone appointed a leader. People are not questioning fallacy. And, you know, I think the question goes well beyond him. It's the entire idea that we should really have experts making these decisions. Well, experts provide advice. They don't actually make decisions. Nobody elected experts, even whether they work for the government or whether they work outside the government. We are not a country that is a technocracy. Somebody else mentioned technocracy. We're not a technocracy. We're not a country that is run by doctors. We're not a country that is run by any kind of experts. We're a nation that is based on representative government. So doctors can provide advice and other doctors will disagree with them. This is the reality of science. But this is normative science. In science, you have constant debates, you have theories, you have hypotheses, and then you try to formalize them. You try to figure out exactly where does the truth lie. And there isn't one guy who has the truth. Science does not have a pope. There's no pope who actually will raise his hand and say, "This is the truth. I have received this from the God of science." It does not work that way. Al Gore was not appointed the Pope of Science. Fauci, nobody else was appointed the Pope of Science. We have dissent among scientists. Now, you know legitimate science from illegitimate science when there's actually debate and dissent. When there isn't debate and dissent, that's not legitimate science, and this is really the case with global warming, where there is no dissent. When 99% of scientists are supposedly agreeing on something, that means it's nonsense.
Can I ask the last question myself?
You're welcome to.
Okay, here's my question. There were a few, I think there was one question where it says, breaking government rule. And based on what I heard of your talk, technically, a lot of things that we're forced to do are not based on our constitution. There might be rules and laws made by the government, but if we don't obey them, technically we aren't guilty of any specific crime. Or am I confusing those two?
Well, no, you're completely correct, and that is a very good point. So throughout American history, there's been a push and pull. We have the Bill of Rights. At the same time, we've had laws that actually violate the Bill of Rights. We've had federal and state laws that were in violation of the Bill of Rights. So the answer to that was, throughout time, civil disobedience. It was pushback. It was people challenging that in court, challenging that personally, and at the same time, even if they're not physically doing anything to challenge it, make it very clear that this is illegitimate. I might not be challenging it in any way. I might agree that perhaps people should stay at home, or perhaps people should wear masks everywhere they go. Of course, these rules keep changing every 5 minutes. Don't wear a mask. Save the masks for healthcare workers. You must wear a mask. These rules keep changing all the time. But the larger point is you can follow the rules. You can try to do what seems to be safe, but you're not doing it because of compulsion. You don't agree that the government has the power to tell you to do these things. You're doing it for public safety reasons. Now, there are countries that have handled this much better, that have actually left it up to citizens. And you know what? When it's left up to citizens, most of the time, people do what's safe. They want to keep others safe. They want to keep their loved ones safe. People are not going to engage in self-destructive behavior for the most part. But when government commands it, when government tells you you have absolutely no choice but to do this, there should be resistance. Now, this resistance does not have to involve engaging in any kind of dangerous behavior, but it should at the very least come with a verbal statement of saying, I do not accept your power to do this to me. I do not abandon my rights. I do not accept that I am a serf of this country. I am a citizen of it, and I am a ruler of it. Every American is a ruler of the country. We do not work for the government. We do not serve the government. The government serves us. And when we forget that, then tyranny happens.
Thank you for that. And hopefully we get back to what we know as normal soon. Daniel, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us. Everybody who's joined us, thank you so much for being here. And remember, these free webinars are brought to you by the David Horowitz Freedom Center and Glazov Gang. And hopefully for us to continue bringing it to you, we need you to please go to frontpagemag.com and click the donate button, and be sure to make a contribution of anything you can. And yes, all your donations will be 100% tax deductible. And we can use that support to continue bringing you more information and educating you on anything that matters at a time. These are going to be regular weekly webinars. Also sign up to Front Page Mag mailing list so you get invitation links for upcoming webinars. Thank you so much, Daniel, again for being with us.
Thank you, Annie, for being the most essential part of all this. The speakers come and go. Annie very much abides. Thank you, everybody. Alan, Sam, Levy, Mark, Michael, Mike, Claire, Kate, Deborah, so many others. Thank you, everybody, for your great questions. Thank you to everybody who didn't ask questions but still came.